Hey guys, what's going on? It's Hey Coach Ryan, episode 26. I'm Coach Ryan Knapp, and I'm glad to be back. It's glad to be back. It's awesome to be back, and thanks so much for being here. It's been almost a year since I shot the last video. It's hard to believe. And yeah, and I'm just 2017. It's time to start getting out in the open a little bit more. That was 2015. 2016 brought baby. So as I've recovered from being a dad, I say that like our son sleeps all the time, like he's really good, so it's been an awesome year, but it's been kind of a little bit of a psychological year of just dealing with all the new things that come with being a dad. And so now that he's almost a year old, which I can't believe, it's time to start helping out again in the open and helping out in public and doing these sorts of things because I really love to do them. So what I want to do is first open it up and say, if you have any questions that you want me to answer in upcoming Hey Coach Ryans, use my email, which is ryan@milesgoendurance.com. You can post a comment here. You can find me on Instagram, which is @RyanKnapp. I'm not on Twitter as much. It's @RyanKnapp again, but just find me, ask questions, and the more questions I get, the more that I'm primed to do these videos. Today, we're going to do a topic, Hey Coach Ryan episode on taper, which is going to take a little bit of time, and I'm going to try to condense it as much as I can and not go on for 45 minutes about it. But I also think it's important that we talk about this as a little bit longer of a concept because I think it warrants it. So Sandy Hilton's question and Miles to Go was reference to a specific article in Trail Runner magazine, which I'll post below, which was from another coach, David Roche, who has a really incredible stable of athletes, a group of athletes that he coaches who are really successful. And one of his athletes won the Black Canyons 100K, and she did that after traveling for 2 weeks before the race, which was supposed to be her taper time. So the discussion was on how he adjusted her taper and what taper looks like. And so with that article, Sandy asked, like, do I subscribe to the way that he does it, which is basically a 25% reduction in mileage the 2 weeks before, and going down to 50% of mileage for the week of the race. And my answer to that would be, it's all individual based on the coach. I'm just going to turn this back on. It's all individual based on the coach. It's all individual based on the athlete. But I want to look at what that is in terms of context and how I look at going about tapering. Okay, so tapering. Why do we do it? We taper because during the course of training, we fatigue ourselves. Stress is stress, and we provide stress to our body to be able to then go through this process of supercompensation, which allows us to become more fit than we were before. So we have a level of fitness, we stress ourselves, we become less fit. Through this supercompensation process, we become more fit, we provide more stress, less fit, more fit, and we ride this wave as we go. And we ride this wave into the race, and then we go ahead and we do that. But the timing of that stress, hey Molly, the timing of that stress is really important. If it's too much stress, we get too fatigued and we overtrain. If it's not enough stress, we don't see that compensation process. So that's timing of workouts. But this all matters because if we don't have that timing of workouts, then the taper doesn't matter, because the taper is this little section at the end of the race that just allows us to be ready for this race. So we got to look at all the other stuff, and that stuff becomes way more important before we talk about taper. So I put it in this context because if you have 16 weeks of shit training, the 3-week taper isn't going to matter at all. So make sure your training is good before you're really worrying about the taper. Now, you're 3 weeks out from the race, you're coming into this tapering period, right? What do we want to do? What are we looking at? We're looking at basically letting our body fully recover to be able to go into the race, or letting it get to a point that we are able to realize this fitness that we have and show it. So if we're constantly fatigued, you're not going to be able to perform your best. But if you let yourself recover, now you're going to be able to use that fitness that you have at a new level. Now, through science, we can look at it, and the consensus is that you're only really going to gain about 3% more fitness from the taper. Meaning that if you knock the taper out of the park, you did everything you were supposed to for yourself, you feel great, you're going to see a 3% bump in fitness. My argument is that the taper matters more the shorter the race is and the more intense the race is. So if you're racing the 400 or 800 or even a 5K half marathon, you're racing these shorter events. You can get to the 100 meters, sure, any of these things. The margin for error is so much less, right? So the 100 meters, the margin of error is like hundredths of a second. for an ultra, the margin of error is way longer. Like, 20 minutes matters, but if you finish in 30 hours or 30 hours, 20 minutes, like, does that 20 minutes matter? Not as much. But if you run, 9.81 versus 9.80 for the 100 meters, like, that's going to matter. Like, those little differences matter based on how short the race is. And the more intense the race is, you need to be able to realize that fitness that you've put in. So that's what we want to look at when we look at taper. But we're looking at it kind of from the ultra trail context, because that's the world that I'm coming from, and that's where this question was coming at. But it's certainly coach half marathoners and marathoners where we look at the taper, but these things are still applying. So what do we look at when we're applying taper? There's three things that we want to look at during this period, which is basically mileage or volume, frequency, and intensity. Right? Those are the three things we're looking at. The first one is mileage or volume. If you're measuring it in hours or you're measuring it in miles, that's the one that everyone's wondering, like, how much less should I run? How much less should I run? Scott Trappy, who's one of the biggest researchers in terms of taper, there's a great podcast on the science of ultra where he talks about it. I'll post it in the notes so you can check it out. His recommendation is a 20-week reduction each week, 3 weeks out, each week going into the race. So you would run 80% of your overall mileage, 60% of your overall mileage, 40% of your overall mileage, and this week you would race. In David's article, he was 2 weeks. He was a 25% reduction in mileage and a 25% reduction in mileage on race week. So there's basically only a 10% difference from Dr. Trappy's way and from what David posted in the article. So you're getting down to about 50% of overall mileage. You can do that in different ways. You can do it more along the lines of, like, you do it kind of gradually. Other ones you drop off pretty hard and then you kind of ride out that taper, so you drop down a little bit faster. Some you'll just reduce kind of every day and go more of like a linear pattern. Different ways to do it. And the biggest thing is figuring out what works for you. Now we've talked about volume. The next thing we talk about is intensity. So if you have intensity in your schedule, you're doing speed work, you're doing tempos, you want to continue to do that, but you want to continue to do the intensity at a reduced level. So if you're reducing your volume by, say, 50%, then you need to reduce your intensity by the same amount so that it's proportional to what you were doing before. So if you're reducing by 50% and you're doing 10 by a half mile, 10 by 800, do 5 by 800 or 4 by 800. Like, err a little bit more on the side of recovery, but don't just drop out all of the intensity out of the race or out of your training, because you still need to keep that. It's still important to keep that in there, because that's going to make you go into the race and feel the best and give your body that stimulus that you were giving it during the course of training. So keep that intensity in, but you want to ratchet it back a little bit based on what you're pulling back your overall volume with. And then the third, which I mentioned the second, is frequency. So you want to keep the frequency or reduce it slightly as you go into the race. So if you're a 6-day-a-week runner, reduce your overall volume, measure out your intent, moderate that intensity, and still run 6 days a week. Maybe drop it down to 5, but don't drop it down to 2 or drop it down to 3, because your body is used to running this 6 days a week, and you want to still give it the same stimulus to be able to keep the fitness that you had earned earlier. Now, we'll talk about that really quickly as we go into kind of the last two things when we talk about taper. The biggest thing that you deal with is people looking at losing fitness or detraining and worrying about that. Detraining and taper are two different things. Detraining is if you had an injury or you just decided to say, screw it, I don't want to run anymore, and you want to sit on the couch and eat chili Fritos and drink Coke all day, you would detrain, and it would take you a while to detrain. You know, it's for every week that you detrain, usually it takes a week to recover. So it's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio we look at. So if you were to do nothing for 3 weeks, it would take you another 3 weeks to get back to where you were, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, I would say. But that's detraining if you're not doing anything. Taper, what the goal is during this taper period is to apply enough stimulus that you still maintain that fitness that you have. And you'll be able to do that as long as you're just following that reduction and you're not reducing to 0 and you're reducing enough. You're going to be able to give your body enough stimulus that you're not going to lose fitness, which is the biggest thing from runners. And the losing fitness thing comes from this physiology of taper versus the psychology of taper, which is something that Dr. Trappy said in this podcast, which I thought was a great way to put it. You're doing two things. You're fighting two fronts on taper. You're fighting the physiological front, which is muscles recover, increase red blood cells if they're low, bring your immune system back to normal, blah, 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 blah. And then you're also fighting it on like the taper crazy wagon. And on that wagon, you have to just trust the training that you've done and trust the science in that you're not going to be worse off by doing this. You're not going to lose fitness. You don't need to do more, because that's what athletes want to do. They want to do more, and the race is coming up and I need to do more, and I need to do more repeats and more. And like, then you just go into the race and you are fatigued as you go into the race. So you need to just trust the training that you've done beforehand and think about the recovery aspect and the adaptation aspect being the main focus. And by doing that, you will see that bump in fitness. But even if you don't see that bump in fitness for whatever reason, you're still going to feel better and be able to perform better at that race as you've gone through the taper. So those are the biggest things that we want to focus on. In terms of how we apply that, like I said, if you reduce by 20-20-20 over 3 weeks, if you reduce by 25-25 over 2 weeks, if you do it over 10 days, it's kind of up to you as a coach and you as an athlete to be able to figure out what's the best way that's going to work for you, and apply that. Come through a taper, go to a race, do a taper, write down what you did, obviously follow it in your training plan, and then see how you felt at the race and be able to see, like, maybe I need to moderate my intensity a little bit. Maybe I had a little bit too much intensity in and I need to ramp it down. Maybe I didn't have enough intensity and I need to be able to add more of that in. And it's just a process to figure out the best way that you're going to be able to do it. Similarly to if you've never run 100 miles and you run 100 miles and you learn so much, you're going to learn so much through each course of training, and you're going to learn so much for that taper that you'll know exactly what you need to do next time to be able to make the physiological adaptations better, and also to deal with the psychological side of things. So that's really what we're doing when we look at taper. Specifically for the article, like I said, it's individual and individual. It obviously worked for her, and I think the coach-athlete relationship there is really awesome as well. So that's also why she was able to trust in her training to do these things and to be able to go out and have such a good race. And if you're able to trust in your coach or trust in your training that you've written for yourself, trust in your taper and recover and adapt and get things ready, then you're going to go out and have the best race that you possibly can. So that's a little bit on taper. There's so much more we can talk about as it comes to it. If you have any other specific questions, go ahead and ask me in the comments below, or you can write me, like I said. My email is ryan@milesToGoEndurance.com. And it was good to be back. It'll take a little bit to shake the rust off and not just talk, and add a little bit more intonation and stuff in the videos, but obviously leave me your comments, what you think, and I read them all. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time with episode 27.